Now I'd like to introduce Assistant Chief George Morgan. He is going to talk to us about best practices in Anne Arundel County that relates to safety. So thank you, George.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Joanne Rund, who happened to be recruit firefighter Joanne Rund, and I think one of the recruit classes that are out there on the pictures of the walls there. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, she met her husband in the recruit class. Currently, I work for the Anne Arundel County Fire Department. I started my career as a volunteer in Anne Arundel County. I worked for Howard County. I went to Hampton, Virginia. Now I'm here. Can't keep a job. Anne Arundel County has 31 stations. It's a combination system comprised of about 1,500 total personnel, 746 authorized career, and the remainder being comprised of our volunteer system. It's a population exceeding of over 550,000, 412 square miles, and about 524 coastal miles. Anne Arundel County Fire Department celebrates its 50th year this coming 2015. And as I looked over some of the history of the Anne Arundel County Fire Department, I recognized that just about every way you could kill a firefighter, we have done in 19 line of duty deaths. Crashes, heart attacks, building fires, all of the ones that are the top biggies we've been involved in, to include a training fire that occurred in our department, not necessarily in Anne Arundel County Fire Department, but within Anne Arundel County, where they came back hours after the house burning was over when they discovered an extra car in the parking lot and realized that they'd lost a firefighter in that structure fire, long before we had things that they're talking about in the training sessions in this session today. We have started our process, much like Howard is moving into with a health and safety division, in 1998, with a division chief and a lieutenant that answered directly to the fire chief. In 1998, we started looking collectively as a fire service, way before the 16 initiatives of how we can reduce our injuries and our associated fire service line of duty deaths. We established an infections control officer, who I might add has been very busy this past week, as I'm sure most of you that have one. We have a safety bureau now that has expanded to a 24-hour safety officer, some QA, QI folks that are in the EMS side of the house that are running a safety officer, a captain in the safety office, and a division chief. And again, still answers to the fire chief. As we look through some of the things that we did, there are some of the same things that some of you have all done. We received a grant back in the early 90s, early 2000s for physical fitness equipment that we outfitted in all of our fire stations. We adopted CPAT testing for our incumbents, or excuse me, for our recruits. We have a health and safety wellness program. You know, again, all of the very same things that probably many of us are doing across the country. Some of the newer items that we've been involved in is what's known as a working fire dispatch. I had to chuckle when the gentleman that I listened to earlier was talking about how you couldn't call for second alarms and you had to wait for people to get on the scene before you did anything. Our working fire dispatch can be initiated in our communications bureau. That is, even before anybody gets on the scene, because I can tell you, probably from my personal experience and as well as yours, that you pretty much knew when you had that working fire. The dispatcher's voices went up a little bit higher. You heard cussing in the background on the radio. You had phones ringing, and it was just that level of that across the street from. That kind of information, we used to have to wait to get on the scene before we could do any additional resources. Not anymore. Communications can put out a working fire dispatch, which takes the next two special services and gets them on the street to assist in minimum staffing before, before a unit has to get on the scene. Some of the other things that we've been involved in is the transitional fire attack. We learned from the Baltimore County events and the NIST studies, that the transitional fire attack is scientific knowledge to tell us what we kind of had a gut feeling wasn't the direct way of fighting fire. We are incorporating that in the entire organization. Those 1,500 people I told you that we have will have an online blended learning process through our training bureau, which is under development as we speak, that coincides with a new OPM for our first response and our fire suppression activities. Just one more tool in that toolbox. That will begin in the next month. The committee has put their program together. The online portion of it should be ready to go. And then there'll be a field delivery, again, established by the training group, to go out to each fire station, each shift, and go over the OPM, as well as using a practical model to show how flow path works. In 2005 and 2006, during that first safety stand down that became the model, Anne Arundel County put together 2 separate videos for each of those years that had a videotape of the fire chief speaking to the effects and the need for safety. Pretty much the same things, again, that we've heard today, and that comprise some of the 16 initiatives. We've taken that a step farther, and we've adopted, obviously, the NIMS model of communications and incident management. And we do that in the non-emergency setting now, because every morning, every operational period, which we have as a 7-day period, so on Monday morning, a new NIMS 204 gets published for the whole activities for the next 7 days, gets put on our website, gets sent to the fire stations, and begins with a sit-rep report put on by our planning group at 08:15 hours, where every station calls in and is video cammed, and the fire chief starts off with the morning report. In that report, the safety officer talks about the incidents that we had in the last 7-day operational period. For instance, they spoke of last week that we had a chest pains patient, one of our own, and a heat exhaustion, both in relationship to probably dehydration in a firefighting class. Any crashes that we had in that 7-day operational period are identified and talked about in that morning briefing by the safety officer. We've noticed an uptick, just in doing this, in backup crashes. That we hope, by bringing it to the attention, just like Gordon Graham said, when you go up to that Southwest employee and they can tell you what the incident rate is, well, we tell our folks what the incident that occurred the previous 7-day operational period, so everybody has a heightened awareness of those kinds of things. We talk about a near miss. We've had some interesting near misses. We had the suicide bomber, which was a near miss. Not bomber, suicide. Yeah, suicide bomber, the guy that decided to kill himself in his house with the cyanide. And we also had a real interesting one where one of our fire trucks ran over those metal grates that they have protecting excavations that they're doing. And it actually created a springboard and set that butt end of the fire truck up and then the front end of the fire truck up and injured 3 of our folks, which got us to be thinking maybe those things aren't engineered or designed for fire trucks to go over at a reasonable rate of speed, but maybe a slower speed. We brought that to everybody's, as well as their attention, but we also showed them pictures of the event, and as far as the situation that we developed from it, and the status of those folks that were injured. After the near miss, we also then talk about a safety message, much the same way as you follow in the NIMS report. The safety message could be something that, in the case of maybe leaving your breathing apparatus on longer, maybe they say something with fall protection, but there's a safety message, a review of the incidents that occurred, and close calls every morning across all 4 shifts. I told you that we got the grant for physical training equipment. We recently were successful in getting a grant for updating our self-contained breathing apparatus. Again, self-contained breathing apparatus, one of our most critical tools to do what we do, and yet ours had reached its life expectancy, and we were just awarded a grant. We're in the process now of looking at some of the vendors. Obviously, one of the vendors that you thanked for your meal has a really good program that we like, that we see that as a step in the right direction for our accountability on the fire ground. We've seen nothing like that before, where we've had the toe tags or the throw them on the bumper or whatever. We believe with the technology out there, with this new SCBA, we'll be taking a forward step in our accountability for our folks when they do go into interior firefighting operations. I told you that we have a 24-hour safety officer, which is new in the last 2 years. The thought process there is not necessarily to have a police person or a policeman, but someone that can run those responses and to assume that responsibility for the incident commander in many cases and allow them to do other functions. We also incorporated that with a volunteer safety officer program where the two members meet the same requirements. So we have a volunteer cadre that can assist in some of those larger units, and they are due on calls and they have a duty crew as well. We thought that safety officers are good, and there's some philosophy out there that they find things at the moment. And so that kind of got us leaning towards some of our culture. You know, that old adage, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him to fish, feed him for life. We have now taken a strong look at incorporating the fire officer or fire safety officer certification through NFPA as one of the requirements for future promotions. So we're in the process of doing that right now and running that through our personnel people. But nonetheless, we can see that if all the officers who assume the responsibility for being a safety officer have met that training requirement and can get them out there doing things. It's not about the policeman being out there anymore, as it's more about the decision-making process that we make on some of our operations. We have followed the risk management model that was probably established with Chief Alan Brunacini. You know, the risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little, risk nothing to save nothing. And oftentimes, the Anne Arundel County Fire Department took the butt of many jokes from the standpoint of lawn ornaments, not very courageous, can't fight fire. And they couldn't be any farther from the truth. The men and women of the Anne Arundel County Fire Department are fine firefighters, but they pick and choose their battles, as we're going to do with transitional attack. We see with the air attack that's going on that it only softens the targets before we come in with the heavy armament. We're looking at softening the targets with transitional attack and our folks knowing when to go in. So they're not lawn ornaments, they're just a smarter firefighter. And our injury rate on our fire ground has dropped tremendously over the last 4 years, 5 years that they have followed that model. And I believe that is probably it for some of the things that we have done for some best practices.
The next person up will be Baltimore County, Chuck Rogers.
Okay, I have one initiative that we're really working on. I'm very proud that, and it didn't actually start by me. It started by a retired battalion chief, Steve Lancaster. When he was working in the safety office, we did a joint study with Johns Hopkins along with Howard County looking at cardiac issues in the fire service. Between our labor and management and our leadership in our fire department, our fire chief empowers our employees to get involved. Everything we do starts at the lower level and works up. In fact, the chief meets with the officers' council every quarter. So most things that you see changes in our fire department doesn't come from the upper management, starts at the lower ranks, and comes to the leadership to carry out. So we're very fortunate with that. So the physicals has always been a hurdle for us. We all know that we need to take care of ourselves for who's in our wallet, as Billy would say. And finally, we got to a point in our department with labor and management that each employee is required to do a physical on their own using their own issued health care that the taxpayers currently pay for. And now, this will be our first year that we do it, and based on that study and the fact that we did find some cardiac issues in some of our people, we're working with Johns Hopkins to make that linkage between Johns Hopkins, the employee, and their personal doctor. The only thing we get from our employees is a signed form that said that they got a physical and they're satisfactory. It's up to the employees and their supervisor to ensure that the employee gets their job description, takes it to their doctor, and does their physical. The second part of that is we're in our second year of our operational readiness training. And we have an operational readiness training, sort of like CPAT, but it's skill measured based on what the firefighters do and the EMT and paramedics do based on their job description. And we are required to do that annually. Again, looking at standardization, testing on the most common skills of the firefighter. We have been doing that. We're on our second year, but the missing link was the physicals. So we're making progress, and we're working with Johns Hopkins. Our hope is to get that scan, the carotid scan that Hopkins talks about, which only costs $100. And it measures hard and soft plaque. The CAT scan only does the hard plaque. And this is just one day of me sitting in a class, and I'm not a practicing doctor. Heck, I'm not even a good EMT, as some of you can attest. So I think it's a great step for our employees. There is no punitive issues with it, just a corrective action plan to keep our people front line. In fact, we went the extra step in our Personnel 27 to create positions for people that can't be frontline firefighters while they're recouping. So there is no threat of discharge or any of those things that you may hear from some people. We always have the naysayers, but peer pressure has always worked in our service. Dictation usually doesn't work. So I'm very proud of what Chief Homan's done. I'm very proud of what the union's done. And I'm very proud of what the management team is working as a goal to on our health and safety.